For over 3 centuries, one factory in a small Swedish town has been arming, building, and mowing its way through history, and almost nobody noticed the thread connecting all three. It started in 1689, on the orders of a king preparing for war. It made muskets by the thousands. It armed soldiers in wars most of us have never heard of. And today, the direct descendant of that weapons factory is sitting in your garage, quietly cutting your grass. This is the story of how a gun factory became a lawnmower company, and why almost nobody making that connection ever stops to ask, how does that even happen? In 1689, Sweden was building up its army for the wars raging across Europe, and the king needed weapons, fast, reliable, and produced at scale. So a rifle factory was established at Jönköping, and within its first years, it was turning out around 1,500 musket barrels a year. The operation needed hydropower to run its drilling and grinding equipment, so a second site was built 7 kilometers away, next to a waterfall, in a place called Husqvarna. That single decision, chasing water power for weapons manufacturing, is the reason the entire company eventually carries that town's name. The people behind it weren't hobbyists. This was state-ordered industry, precision boring, precision grinding, done at a level most 17th century workshops couldn't touch. And that original musket barrel became so central to the company's identity that its image, a gun sight, is still the company's logo today. For over a century, this factory did one thing: make weapons for Sweden's military. It seemed permanent. It seemed like the entire reason the company existed. Nobody looking at that gun sight logo in 1750 would have guessed what was coming. Here's the problem nobody plans for. Wars end. Weapons contracts dry up. And a factory built entirely around precision metalworking for muskets suddenly has a skill set with no market. By the 1860s and 1970s, demand for military weapons production was shrinking. The factory had machinists, engineers, and drilling equipment capable of extreme precision, but a shrinking reason to use any of it on rifles alone. This is the moment most companies in this position simply die. Precision manufacturing built around one product, for one customer, in one shrinking industry, that's a business model with an expiration date, and by the late 1800s, the expiration date was arriving. So the factory made a strange bet. Instead of chasing more weapons contracts, it looked at what it actually had: hydropower, precision boring, trained metalworkers, and asked a different question: what else can this precision build? The answer, in 1872, was sewing machines. Then bicycles, then motorcycles, and heating boilers. The same tolerances that made a rifle barrel accurate were now making a sewing machine needle move perfectly, or a motorcycle engine run smooth. Nobody outside the company saw the connection. From the outside, it looked like a weapons company had randomly wandered into household goods. The real turning point came in 1918, when the company acquired another Swedish manufacturer and picked up something new in the process. Lawnmowers and heating boilers entered the product line for the first time. Then, in 1959, the company began producing chainsaws and power lawnmowers under its own name. The exact precision engineering DNA that once bored rifle barrels was now cutting timber and grass. By 1968, it had acquired a hovermower manufacturer, expanding into the UK, Australia, and Germany. The weapons factory that once existed to arm a 17th century army was now a multinational outdoor power equipment company, and the original firearms division eventually became defunct, folded entirely into what the company had become. Who won here wasn't obvious at the time. It wasn't the weapons division. That side of the business eventually disappeared completely. It was the philosophy behind it, that precision manufacturing is a transferable skill, not a fixed identity tied to one product. The companies that survived industrial shifts like this one weren't the ones that clung to their original product. They were the ones that clung to what they were actually good at and let the product change underneath it. Today, That same company is one of the largest outdoor power equipment manufacturers in the world, building robotic lawnmowers, chainsaws, and construction demolition robots, sold in more than 100 countries. The Gunsight logo is still there. Most people who own one of these mowers have never once connected it to a 1689 musket factory. But the line is unbroken. From a king's war order, to a waterfall in a small Swedish town, to precision ground rifle barrels, to sewing machines, to the machine quietly cutting grass in driveways across the world right now. The real story here isn't about weapons, or lawnmowers, or even one company. It's about what actually survives industrial. Somewhere in southern Sweden, there's a factory that has spent 336 years quietly switching identities, and almost no one who owns its most famous modern product has any idea what it used to make. It began in 1689, when a king at war ordered a rifle factory into existence. That factory churned out muskets by the thousand. It equipped soldiers for conflicts most people alive today couldn't name. And the strange part is, if you trace that same company forward through time, it ends up sitting in your garden shed right now, quietly mowing your lawn. This is the story of a gun factory that turned into a lawn equipment company, and the reason almost nobody ever connects the two. Sweden, 1689. Europe was locked in wars that showed no sign of ending, and the crown needed a reliable source of weapons. So a rifle works was set up in Jönköping, and within its earliest years it was producing roughly 1,500 musket barrels annually, an industrial pace for the era. That operation depended on hydropower to run its boring and grinding machinery. So a second site went up beside a waterfall, 7 kilometers away, in a town called Husqvarna. That one logistical choice, building next to moving water, is the reason the company still carries that town's name, centuries later. This wasn't a small workshop. It was state-backed, precision-driven manufacturing, at a level of accuracy most 17th century operations simply couldn't match. The musket barrel itself became so tied to the company's identity that a Gunsight symbol became its logo, and that same symbol is still used today. Within a few decades, the factory was employing well over 1,000 people, an enormous number for the time, and every one of those jobs depended on a single customer, the Swedish military. That worked beautifully as long as the wars kept coming. It also meant the entire business was one shift in royal demand away from disaster. For more than 100 years, this factory had exactly one purpose: arm Sweden's soldiers. It felt permanent. It felt like the whole reason the company existed. Anyone staring at that Gunsight emblem in 1750 would have laughed at the idea it might one day appear on a lawnmower. But here's what nobody plans for. Wars eventually stop. Weapons contracts dry up. And a factory built entirely around musket production suddenly has a highly specialized skill set and nowhere to sell it. By the 1860s, military orders were shrinking fast. The factory still had the machinists, the engineers, the precision drilling equipment, but rifles alone weren't enough to justify it anymore. This is usually the point where a company like this quietly disappears. A single product, a single customer, a shrinking industry. That combination has an expiration date, and by the late 1800s, that date had arrived. In 1867, the company restructured completely, reorganizing into a joint stock enterprise and building a new modern workshop, essentially forcing itself to answer a question most manufacturers of the era never asked. What happens to us the day the orders stop? So instead of chasing whatever weapons contracts remained, leadership looked at what the company actually possessed: hydropower, trained metal workers, extreme manufacturing precision, and asked a very different question. What else could that precision be used to build? The answer, arriving in 1872, was sewing machines, then bicycles, then motorcycles, then heating equipment. The exact same tolerances that once made a rifle barrel fire straight were now making a sewing needle glide perfectly, or a motorcycle engine run without a shudder. From the outside, it looked bizarre. A weapons manufacturer suddenly making household goods. Nobody outside the walls understood it was the same precision, just pointed somewhere new. That pattern didn't stop. Through the early 1900s, the company kept layering new products onto that same manufacturing foundation. Electric stoves, dishwashers, washing machines, quietly turning a single-purpose armory into something closer to a full engineering conglomerate, one that just happened to have started with gun barrels. The real pivot arrived in 1918, when the company absorbed another Swedish manufacturer, and, almost as a side effect, inherited two entirely new product lines: lawnmowers and heating boilers. Then, in 1959, under its own name, the company began building chainsaws and powered lawnmowers. The very same precision engineering that once bored rifle barrels was now slicing through timber and grass. By 1968, it had acquired a manufacturer of hover mowers, pushing operations into the UK, Australia, and Germany. The rifle factory, built to arm a 17th-century army, had become a multinational outdoor equipment manufacturer, and the original firearms division eventually vanished entirely, absorbed into whatever the company had turned into. In 1978, one of Europe's largest appliance conglomerates acquired